Okay, now I am being silent.
Three, and you are live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Glasgow 2024 Presents, a conversation between Peter Beagle and Catherynne Valente. My name is Alison Scott. I'm a staffer for Glasgow 2024. A very warm welcome to everyone who's here on Eventbrite and also people who are watching on YouTube. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be doing this event, and I hope you're as excited as I am. This is subject to the Glasgow. So first of all, Glasgow 2024 is next year's World Science Fiction Convention, if you don't know. It'll be happening in Glasgow from 8th to 12th of August 2024. Do join if you're not already a member. It will be amazing. This seminar, therefore, is subject to the Glasgow 2024 Code of Conduct, which you can read on the Glasgow 2024 website. And it's, as you'd expect, a convention code of conduct to be, no tolerance policy on racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, anything of that kind. We've got a tech who's just going to be keeping an eye on what you say in chat. So just keep your chat respectful and pleasant, and you will be fine. So if you are actually in the webinar with us on Eventbrite, you add your questions using a question and answer section at the bottom. And we already have one question, which I'm going to answer live from Catherynne Hickson, who has asked, will this talk be available later? And the answer is yes, it will be. It's going to stay around on YouTube afterwards, though it's also live on YouTube at the moment. We've got the chat as well. Our tech, David Green, is going to be keeping an eye on the chat, and he'll pull anything out of that. But if you want to ask a question, the best way to do it is to put it in the Q&A. And I think you can probably also vote up questions. Is that right, David? Can people vote up questions in the Q&A? Do you know?
No.
Okay, they can't. Right. So we're not going to be doing that. But we'll pick up questions and we should be able to answer most of your questions. If you're on YouTube and watching, you can also do questions. You also have chat. And David's going to be monitoring the chat there and pulling out any questions and letting me know. Okay. Right. You're going to be messaging me with questions, David, or are you going to be putting them in the chat?
I'll send them into the chat just for the panelists and yourself. Yeah.
Lovely, perfect. If you're live tweeting this or using other, because we don't live tweet anymore, but if you're using other online social media, please use the hashtag Glasgow 2024 so that we can catch anything that you're saying about this. Okay. So I'd like to start by asking Peter and then Kat to each say a little bit about themselves, and then I have a question which I've set up in advance to ask you. Do you want to start, Peter?
Well, I'm immensely old. I'll be coming up on, by the time we're at the convention, I'll be coming up on, how the hell old am I?
You'll be 85.
I'll be 85. I have friends, I was reminded, I'm 85. And I don't remember a great deal except what I have to remember. Somehow I can still remember the story I'm working on, generally. And I can remember baseball scores from the 1920s and 30s. I have no business remembering. Beyond that, I'm grateful that I remember it's time to eat lunch. I can do that. And I need a beer. That's what I need. I need a beer. I got beer. I'm set. Now, what was I working on? It's like that. It's very much like that. I'm here. By God, I'm still here. And there's always beer. And there's always a story to tell. Okay, I'm in business. That's about it.
Okay, what Peter didn't say is that he's one of the world's most famous fantasy writers and wrote a number of novels that are inspirational to a whole lot of us, which I think is probably clear from the audience.
Oh, that yes.
Already.
Yeah. But that's what I do. That's what I've done since I was 4.
Write stories.
I can remember when there were grown-up people at my house, my parents' house, looking around for somebody who could read. I wasn't sure who could read or didn't know how that worked. But I would ask, Mr. So-and-so, because I was always carrying a book, can you read? Because I want to be read to. That's what I did. And that's how far back that need to read goes.
Okay, Kat, do you want to say a few words about what you are, who you are, and what you do?
I am medium old. I'm 44. I'm a fantasy and science fiction writer for about 20 years now. If you know my work, you may know it from the Fairyland series or space opera, Deathless, Palimpsest. I've written 47 books now. I grew, I mean, I can, my reading story, the first like big kid book that I read without any help was The Neverending Story, and I was 5 years old. And nobody there were grown-ups at my parents' house as well, and I came in to tell my dad that I'd finished it, and nobody believed that I could possibly have read that book. Though the book itself is not literally never-ending, for a 5-year-old, it might as well be. And all those grown-ups quizzed me on everything in the book, like grabbed the book, flipped to pages, quizzed me on it, and I got everything right because of course I'd actually read it. I don't think The Last Unicorn really followed on too long after that. There was a quick follow-up to it. But fast forward, and now I have a son named Bastian. That book is still very, very important to me. And I have been fortunate enough to live a life full of books.
So my first question to you both is, how did you meet?
We talked about this a little before. That I'm going to take this one because I was a child.
Because I don't remember.
But there's no reason for Peter to remember this story, and I've told it a couple of times. But so it just so happened by coincidence that I went to high school in the city that Peter used to live in, Davis, California. And I met Peter Beagle when I was 15 because he came to speak to my creative writing class at my high school, which I should not have been in. I was 15 and a sophomore, and it was the senior creative writing class. But at the time, I was very cocky. So I literally went into my guidance counselor with my portfolio and said, do not put me in a 10th grade writing class. And they agreed. And that had happened only like a week before Peter came. So it was only by gumption that I got to meet him. And it was the first time I'd met a real live writer. Like in my mind, they were just like superheroes. Like you don't get to meet Iron Man. You don't get to meet an author. That's not a thing. And I was so in awe, but Peter was so real. Like the way that you talked about living as a writer and working as a writer, it felt like a real job, like a thing a human could do, that was a thing that you could aspire to do. And it was the first time I thought in any way that was something that I might maybe do one day. And I could fill up this entire session with stories about the things I remember that Peter said. But very briefly after that, Peter and I were actually in a writing group together because of my high school boyfriend's mother, who had organized one. Again, these are all things that, like, for me, like shine with the light of the sun. And there is no reason for Peter to remember because he's had this long life and I had no life at the time. And so it was so incredibly formative for me. And I felt so grown up and possible and accepted. And the absolute love affair I had with his work was made much more intense. And I kept on reading all through the years. And the first time I ever got to tell this story was the first time I was guest of honor at a convention, and Peter happened to be the co-guest of honor. So the first time that I got to do that, I got to tell this story all the way through without saying who the writer was until the end, as a little present to Peter, because it really does turn out those school visits can matter in such enormous ways to people, and that did me. And after that convention where we were guests of honor, we have stayed good friends ever since.
Wow. One of the really nice things about being very old is that you get to hear stories all over again, which I should know, should remember, and don't, so I can hear them again. It's like being a child, wanting their favorite story. Because I love thinking about knowing Kat without knowing I was knowing her. That's wonderful. Everything's new. So you get old, everything is fresh all over again. I can keep that up for quite a while. But I'm thrilled by your story, Kat. Thank you. Thank you. I can hardly wait to forget it. Now remember all over again. That's the great thing about being really old.
Well, thank you for having been one of the first magics in my life.
So I asked Peter just before this whether he still did school visits, and well, do you still do school visits, Peter?
Every now and then I do. And as long as I can find the room I'm supposed to be in, as long as I can remember who invited me and can address them with any luck by name, then I'm okay. The kids are fine. The kids don't know any better. They'll ask serious questions. When you're old, the kids will ask you things that adults know they shouldn't ask. Kids don't know any better. So you have to be much more awake for them, much more alert. I've learned that.
Do you have a favorite question that a child has asked you?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a favorite question that a kid has asked you?
I probably do, and I can't remember it. It's like that. That's how old I am. That's how strange things are right now. I'm amazed I still remember how to tell a story. That's the great terror. What if I can't do that anymore? I'm serious. I wake up in the night sometimes thinking about that. Do I remember how I used to do that? That's always the terror. Fortunately, I wake up with a story in my head and I'm all right.
God, I was really hoping that would go away at some point. Waking up worried you can't do it again.
Some days more than others. It varies a great deal. But the terror in the night is always there. Fortunately, I sleep very well. That's another side effect of being old. I sleep very well.
I can share that once a little girl, I was on a tour for Fairyland, once a little girl in Vermont marched right up to the front and asked, "Are you ever going to write a book about unicorns?" With that tone. She was furious that nothing I'd read had unicorns in it. And I said, well, I have a book that has a unicorn in it. And she said, is it about unicorns? And I said, well, not really. And she went and turned around and walked away. But I love that about kids. I genuinely do. And now, because of her, someday, I don't know what it'll be, I will write a book about unicorns and I will dedicate it to her because she was so in herself, knew what she wanted, brooked no fools. I love that about kids when they care about something.
So Rose Robinson in the audience. Oh, go on, Peter.
I have a friend I have known since we were not quite 5, 4.5, something like that. We lived across the street from each other in the Bronx in New York. And we've always been friends, even when we were aggravated at each other. He's a painter, I'm a writer. And I can remember spending a summer together in New York State somewhere when we were both about 21 years old. And he was out during the day painting, and I'd be in the living room trying to figure out what I was writing. And he came in and literally looked over my shoulder and said, "The unicorn lived in a lilac wood, and she lived all alone. What's a lilac wood?" And I turned on him and said, "How the hell do I know? If I knew, I wouldn't be writing about it. Go paint." And he went off. And he went off and painted, and I went back to work. And that evening we threw something together for dinner. And then we spent the night playing our guitars all night because that was what we did. That was what was important. I was very young then. He was very young, and both of us knew beyond a doubt that we were never going to die. It did not last all that long, but I still remember what it felt like. So does he. We talk on the phone very frequently.
So one of the Rose Robinson in chat has asked, does Cat do school visits as well?
I do. Not as many. I mean, obviously the pandemic changed everything as far as going in person to places. So a lot of them are over Zoom now. But yeah, I have a standing policy that any school in Maine I'll go to for free, because most schools here just don't have the funds to do anything particularly for kids. So I will often pack up and go to some rural school. I love doing school visits. It is a tremendous amount of energy, because you not only have to do all the things you do in a normal reading or something like that, but you need to have your classroom management skills and all of that, especially because, I mean, younger readers, I write middle grade. Sometimes they have me in third grade classrooms. That's a lot to deal with. But for all the reasons that that Peter said, like I love going to talk to kids, particularly because they don't know how not to be excited about things. At some point, like, people teach us to not show we're excited about something, and until about 8th grade, kids haven't learned shame yet, and they are so full of enthusiasm, and they'll tell you if they hated your book too. Like, they have no qualms about that. If they thought it was terrible, you're going to know about it. But again, I admire that completely, and I've had such wonderful times on tours, and I have met people that are now adults that I am still friends with. And it is a very special, very unique experience to be trusted with such young people, and in a time in their lives and in a place in their lives where they are becoming who they will be in the future.
Then they get to 8th grade and they become cool. And when they're cool,
the curtain falls.
I never stop being excited.
I mean, anybody does, but people shame you for it, and then somewhere around 8th grade, they learn not to show it as much.
Yeah, certainly true. Somebody called Hunt Teach on YouTube, hello if you're there, has asked a related question, which is, do you like talking with your fans at autograph sessions, or would you rather that they just get their autograph and move on? Sure. Peter, do you want to take this?
I like talking with my fans. Yeah. I like talking with my fans as much as I can. Sometimes I simply do not know what I should answer. I am constantly being warned. Don't tell them that. You shouldn't say that. And the worst thing is that in my old age, I'm likely to say anything. Sometimes to amuse myself, sometimes to amuse the kids, sometimes because that's a really good question and I haven't thought of the answer. And if I'm on a good day, I'll be able to say, I don't know. Let me think. I'll get back to you. Let me think about that. Because there's things you're never quite prepared for. That's the interesting part. You're never quite prepared. Think fast, Captain. And because there's so much that you can do while you're still asleep. There's so many questions you can answer because you've answered them so many times that you don't even have to be awake, which is very useful. It saves time. You can you can actually get in a nap where your eyes are still open. But every once in a while, oh my God, I didn't think about that. What to do? But that keeps the blood moving. That's what's exciting.
I love talking to my fans. I have always made it a policy, like, we're all here, we're getting through the whole line. If we have to move into another room because there's another signing or something like that, we will do that. Usually when you're doing some kind of signing, there will be somebody that will go down the line and get everybody's names for you and put it on a Post-it to save time. And I won't let anyone do that, because I was a fan for a long time before I was a writer. And I remember why people are in that line. For the most part, unless they're selling things on eBay, they don't really care about the signature. That's not what it's about. They just want to have a minute of connection with somebody who made something that meant so much to them. And the thing is that a lot of people who read science fiction and fantasy are very shy. And if I can't even ask their name, there may not be an easy way for me to start a conversation to give them that moment. And I want to make sure that they get that little bit of connection. And I want to help that happen as much as possible. And I'm very aware of how shy and introverted and how intimidating it can be. I remember being 15 in that little classroom, like how intimidating that can be. So I try to set things up so that we can have an easy conversation with nobody feeling anxious. And I absolutely love talking to my fans, and anybody who wants a hug, as long as there is not literally a pathogen in the room, like everybody gets a hug. I love it.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm just having a slight technical problem here. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, that was a fantastic answer, as people in chat have said.
You end up thinking about this stuff quite a bit when you're in that phase of transitioning from fan to author, and I remember all the times where I wanted that connection and I was too shy to make it happen, and I remember times when people were too busy or rude, and just like all of that makes you feel so stymied. And if you wait in a line to talk to anybody, I think you should get your moment.
There is a writer who's dead now, like, God, I could put that in with a rubber stamp. There's so many writers I've known who are all gone. But there was a writer, a screenwriter, whose father was a writer I admired enormously. And when we met, he was amazed that I remembered his father's writing. And I was dumbfounded to meet him. And we stayed friends until he died. His father was, nobody, I suppose, would know his father today, but his father wrote the Mr. Dooley essays. Mr. Dooley, which nobody reads now because it's written in Irish dialect. But Mr. Dooley was very popular in the early part of the 20th century and even into the 1920s. And he's wonderfully funny, wonderfully sharp, alarmingly sharp, bitter, delightfully funny. And my father introduced me to Mr. Dooley as a character, and I fell in love completely. And so I was dumbfounded to meet his son. And his son was dumbfounded that I knew his father. And we stayed friends until he died. We wrote back and forth. His son, by the way, became a screenwriter. And as he said in a letter, well, I was a college graduate, and I knew I know all the local dance steps. In 1930, I was very cool, very cool. So what else could I be but a screenwriter? And I understood. But the main thing is you never know whom you're going to meet or why you meet them or why it turns out that they like your work. Sometimes they get it wrong. Sometimes, no, that's not what I meant. Well, I don't care. It was nice to meet you. And every once in a while, you meet a lifelong friend. It does happen. Especially if you're a shy person and you don't know how to meet people. So it's lovely when they come and meet you.
So I think Finlay Peter Dunn is the writer of the Mr. Dooley essays, and there's at least one great fan of them in the chat, which I think is very nice. So you're not alone. So people do still read them. And I wanted to.
I used to meet.
Sorry, what was that,
Peter? I used to meet regularly with a librarian who's a dear friend of mine, and who ran a class of her own. She wasn't paid for it, but outside the library, she would have meetings with high school and junior high school kids who wanted to write fantasy or wanted to write something unpopular. And she would always ask me to come and meet with them because she couldn't pay me, except if she's a great baker. And I would come and speak to her class, her group of students, first because I liked them, because they were likely to ask me something I wasn't prepared for. And also because she cooked chocolate chip cookies the size of truck tires. I could get a week's work out of one of her chocolate chip cookies. I'd do anything for that. And that's literature as I know it.
I'm going to pick up some of the questions from chat. And as you might imagine, we've had a lot of questions about The Last Unicorn. Essentially, people saying, what inspired you to write it? if you had to choose a favorite character, who would it be? Why unicorns in particular, seeing as you are somebody who has written books about unicorns, and how did you come up with the first line?
I accept the fact at my age that this is the book I'm stuck with. This one is not my favorite of my own books, though I like it very much. But this is the one that became a movie that's always in print, and that's the way it is. Be grateful. I keep reminding myself in my old age, accept everything and be grateful. The emphasis is on being grateful. The Last Unicorn was something I made up simply because it seemed like an interesting idea. I was 21 years old, for heaven's sake. I was probably 19 when I started writing it. That's what you do at that 19. Why not? Looks interesting. And amazingly, I had an agent at that age who encouraged me to go on with it. And a couple of friends, like my artist friend, who were crazy too and didn't know any better. It's just what I do. Who knew? And I made up other stories that I liked better. There were things that were published, things that weren't, things I'd love to go back to. The Last Unicorn was just, in so many ways, a one-shot accident. But that's what happens to other writers. I've heard other stories like that. I have favorite writers who had one particular book that became a movie. And a great actor wanted to act in that movie, played his lead character. And it was made specifically because of that actor. You simply never know. Things have happened that had nothing to do with The Last Unicorn, nothing to do with the book, nothing to do with what I did. It's just a combination of circumstances. And I became friends, for instance, with the actor who played King, the villain of the piece, Christopher Lee. And Christopher loved that book for reasons I'll never quite understand. It was his favorite. Of his many movies he'd made, that was one of the 5 that he loved. And I can remember somewhere I was giving a talk in Japan. I do not speak Japanese. I had to be translated. But Christopher was in the audience. And I said at some point, the one thing I have learned in a lifetime of doing this stuff is that you are never quite as hip as you thought you were. And that you're never gonna get it right. But you will get it wrong in ways you didn't expect. And afterwards, Christopher came up to me and said immediately, wants in demand in his Christopher Lee voice, and just where the hell did you get that notion in your head? He knew something I didn't. Something I'd said meant something to him. I wasn't quite sure. I never did know. But we stayed friends till he died. And I still didn't know what I'd said that meant so much to him. Something about his own life. But he knew. So I accepted that. Whatever it was, he knew. And that's so much the way it is with books, with stories. It means something to somebody you'll never know.
Now, I know from my research that The Last Unicorn is a book that Kat often cites as being one of her favourites. So would you like to say a little bit about
that? I'll try not to cry. I mean, it's one of those books that I know I read it very young. I probably was right after a couple of books after Neverending Story, and then I read it over and over again as I grew up. I mean, Every little girl thinks she's a unicorn on the inside. That's part of why we all love it. That's part of why we see ourselves in it. But I had a very lonely childhood, and I think what I loved about her was not just that she was secretly a unicorn, but that she was really lonely, and that I saw myself in, and always a little bit out of place, which I have always been as well. And I think that's another reason people attach so strongly to it. Because those of us who love fantasy books, I mean, we never quite fit in. And it is such a simple but visceral depiction of those lonely places that all of us will end up in our lives. Like, everybody's got a part of your life where you're wandering around a broken old castle, forgetting who you are. You know, sometimes that's a bad marriage. Sometimes that's staying too long in graduate school. Sometimes, you know, that's the slog of the first 5 years of a kid's life. There's all kinds of times in life where we're wandering around King Hagrid's castle. And I think it's a different book every time I read it. And now with my son, when we are picking our way through it, and he's watched the movie a couple of times. And of the things that I love about The Last Unicorn, my son has now added one. I told Peter this at Worldcon in Chicago, that after he watched the whole thing for the first time and commented that the Red Bull was not having safe bodies or respecting others and needed to have a timeout and think about things. At the end, I said, well, what did you think? Did you like it? And he said, well, that's not The Last Unicorn. And I said,
Of
okay.
course not.
And he said, because I am the last unicorn. So I think believing that you're a unicorn knows no gender. And
right, of course.
Maybe not just
the kid's right, of course he is.
And but there are things that make it so different than other unicorn books. And one of them is Molly Grew, who I have always loved the scene where she gets angry at the unicorn. It's such a it's so perfect and out of left field and surprising but inevitable, as professors have said. And her being angry that it came at the wrong time, I think that was the moment, even as a little kid, where it changed from a book I was really enjoying to a book I was going to read again.
I don't know where Molly came from. I have never known. But if not Molly, no book. It's that simple. If not Molly, no Last Unicorn. I don't know how. I didn't know she was going to be there. She was just suddenly there. She just walked into the book and that was it. I marvel at her to this day because I was too young to understand Molly. I bless her constantly. And I think about the actress who played her, who understood her. Because I can explain everything else in that book except Molly. And yet, if not Molly, no book. I don't know how else but to explain that. I'm very, very glad that she turns up in another story of mine, somewhat older, but still Molly. Oh, thank God, there she is. And somehow I still understand that note of music. I know who it is. Because you can't depend about that. Sometimes you lose a character. You forget. I did know how to draw him or her. But that was when I was younger. I don't remember now. But Molly's been like a note of music in my head. As long as I can follow that note, I'm okay.
So we've had a couple of people ask in chat for both of you which your favourite character in The Last Unicorn is. So, I mean, mine would indeed be Molly. So I don't know about the other two. What about you two?
Well, it would have to be Molly. Molly's my blessing. Because as I said, I don't know where she came from. The others I can explain to one degree or another easily. But Molly just came out of nowhere. And it changed my life. She all by herself changed my life. A lot of reasons.
She is certainly my favorite. And that story is one of the ones Peter told in my class that really spun me around. And I've had to eat a little crow about it because at the time when I was 15, I was like, I don't know what he's talking about. He made that character up. That's a weird thing to say. Like that's not a thing. Writers are weird. But I wrote a book called The Past is Red. The protagonist is a girl named Tetley. She's nothing like Molly, and she's nothing like me. But I don't know where she came from either. And she just fell into my head, completely fully formed. And I was like, oh, now I know what he's talking about. And I never had with any other character. Sorry?
All you can do is be grateful.
And I am,
because you're not going to get very many of those.
No.
So this links to another question we've had from Debbie, which is, your characters are so real and vivid that they become like lifelong friends that I have. How do you develop those characters, and do they just show up in your head?
You mean me?
The question was for Peter, but I think I'm going to ask both of you, because I think you've both got very rich characters that are very, very evocative. Do your characters show up in your head? How do you develop characters?
It does have something to do, I think, with a lonely childhood, where you're constantly keeping yourself company with fictional, semi-fictional, almost fictional characters. I had a lot of those. I loved Rudyard Kipling's Mowgli stories. And when I was taking a bath as a kid, I was one of Mowgli's wolves swimming the Wangunga River. It's no accident that one of my favorite wives, if you will, was a better writer than I am, and she was from India. And I realized that she had physical problems, and she was such a bloody good writer that I did most of the cooking. Although she was an Indian cook, she was a wonderful cook, but it would take her all day to do a proper Indian meal. So I would tell her to go upstairs and do your work. I'll make something, because she was that good. And sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes all you can do is be grateful, because there are so many characters that I can't explain. Sometimes minor characters, but I don't know where I got that one. Does it work? It works. Okay, if it works, that's it. Because the most important thing for me is that this is the only way I know to make a living. The only way. The only other thing I ever could bring in money to do was singing in a coffee shop in Santa Cruz, California, which I did for 14 years on weekdays, well, no weekends, two or three nights a week. And sometimes that was the only money that was coming in. And that's all I do. That's the only thing I know how to do. I've just been incredibly lucky that somehow it's fed me and fed my children at that time. And all I can do, as I've said, is just be grateful. Could have been a lot worse. Just be grateful.
Yeah, I think it depends on the piece. Like some things start with a line, some things start with an idea, some things start with a world or a plot arc, and some things start with a character. The thing that I always start with is names. Everybody has to have a name, because I can't get to know anyone if I don't know their name.
True, names are good.
Yeah, so I might spend 6 months coming up with names before I actually start the writing of the book. It matters a lot to me. But I think that, I mean, the relationship between character and story is very braided and complicated, because it has to be the right character for the story to move the story along, but the story is affected by the characters in it and the choices that they would make. All of that is, I don't know, in some ways it's kind of the CPU that is the brain running at all times, no matter what else you're doing, trying to compile all of that into a workable whole. And of course, with fantasy, particularly, we're also dealing with archetypes and in folkloric tropes and the kinds of twists that we want to put on that, and the kind of things that we want to say about it, and the kind of people who might illustrate those things. But once you're sort of in it, they really are people. They feel as vivid as any of your real life friends. I wrote a book called The Refrigerator Monologues, which is about superheroes' girlfriends, and those are my girls. When I finished writing that book, I actually cried because I very uniquely, I was going to miss them in a very strange way. And it would, like, obviously I could go back and write more, but it's like graduating from high school. Like, it'll never be quite the same again as it was when you were all first starting out together. And I get very attached to my characters. And I think getting the ability to get attached to the characters you're making comes across in the work and makes it possible for others to attach to them. Like, if you don't love these people, I don't know that others are going to. And then of course you have to realize them and do terrible things. It's a lot like parenting.
I made up Schmendrick the magician from bedtime stories that I would tell my children. Schmendrick is an old Jewish word. And as a kid, it was a play on Mandrake the magician. And my children always wanted a story before they went to bed. And I told them a lot of stories about the world's worst magician, Schmendrick the magician. So he simply walked into the book. There was no question about it. But he annotates the book. First Schmendrick, later on the book. And in the same way, there's a book of mine called The Way Home, which is actually two stories from a heroine. She tells the story. She's about she's about 9 when she first tells the story, and then the second one when she's 17. And I'm very fond of her. I miss her. I'm so glad I got those two stories. I know it's not impossible that she may turn up again. But that was.
I was going to ask, is that why you decided to return to the world of The Last Unicorn?
Only accidentally. Yes, they works out. I didn't realize that at the time. I think I gradually realized that I was writing the book. But again, if you're doing it right, you get lucky. If you pay attention and make mistakes, you get lucky. That's something that's all you can pray for. I don't care what else. Let me be lucky. There have been times when I went up the wrong tree completely, the wrong road. No, drop it. It's never going to work out. Leave it alone. It's not going to work. All right. Do something different, something else. But I've been doing this a long time because, as I said, it's all I know how to do. So you better be good at it, because that's it, buddy. I knew that early on.
So you won't be surprised to know that as soon as you said that The Last Unicorn was not your favorite of your books, a very large number of people in chat said, okay, so Peter, what is the favorite of your books? And they've also asked Kat, what's the favorite of your books as well? What's your favorite of your books as well?
Well, I have favorites now that I didn't realize were favorites at the time. Later on, you look at the book and you think, wow, that came out all right. In fact, that is good. In fact, that's really good. Ooh, who knew? Because I never know at the time. I just need to get this done and this check collected. And the main thing is, don't try not to shame yourself. Don't turn something that will be published that you're never going to be able to talk about afterwards. So that's the book that will be out about the time I'm in Scotland. There's a book called I've got to get the title exactly right. Yeah. I'm just getting it properly.
I'm afraid you've got dragons.
That's it. I'm afraid you've got dragons. It's like, in a way, it's the punchline to an old joke, but does have to do with dragons and does have to do with a hero who's got dragons and he doesn't have a few in the house. With his gig, he learned it from his father. It's what his father did, was you eliminate dragons, you spray them, you get rid of them. He's very good at it, but he hates doing it. And this novel becomes the story of his life and things he never expected to happen. Not to mention the young woman he becomes involved with. I do like her. I've been very lucky with female characters, I think, maybe because I pay more attention to them. That could be it. That's probably been true all my life. Just paid. Women were always more interesting than men. I can't help it. They just were. And they still are. God knows they still are. Men are okay too. Women are just more interesting.
Kat, do you have a favorite of your own books?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. It's probably Deathless. Deathless is a retelling of a Russian fairy tale set during the siege of Leningrad and World War II. And as Peter says, like, I look at that, I go, I did a pretty good job on that one. I'm proud of it, and I think it came out closest to the book in my head before I started writing it, which is kind of the measure for me, because you have this. Peter Straub talks about this in the Night Room, like this perfect book in your head when you first conceive it, and then you continually screw it up by actually writing it. But if it's the proximity to that original perfect book that I imagined is kind of what makes it a favorite of the books I've written for kids. It's certainly the first Fairyland book.
That is the way it is. It's just, in the end, you find yourself saying that's the way it is. And you hope you got as close to the thing in your head as you possibly could. But that thing in your head, nothing to do but write another book. That's how it is.
Yeah, and I mean, Peter, you've been writing your whole life, and I've been writing for about 20 years. Like, you can look back and you see that you became a better writer over time and see things that you might have done differently down the line. And
sure.
What I always hold on to is, yeah, but I know I wrote the book I wanted to write at the time. It is a little snapshot of who I was and who the world was and the story I wanted to tell and the state of, the genre and what people were doing. It's this little moment in time that then travels forward in time to meet the people who are going to read it and create the little discrete, unique books that are made between a reader and the book that they're reading. It's never the same twice. So there's these little time machines that move all around, collecting new people to travel in time, because at the same time that reader is traveling back to meet the person that I was and the people I made back then. And it is one of the truest real time travels that we can ever experience in life.
Exactly. And as I've said, all you can do is be grateful. You got this far. You met these people. Be grateful. The older I get, the more I find myself saying that. Given all the stuff you missed, all the people you never met, all the things you got wrong, all the stuff you got wrong, be grateful all the same. That becomes, at my age, that becomes very important.
I think it's important at every age.
I'm sorry?
I think it's important at every age to be grateful. Practicing gratitude. I've got another query about not favorites, but if you were asked to recommend a single book to somebody who hadn't read any of your work, what would you recommend to them? This is for both of you. Let's do Kat first this time.
So I have ADHD and it nearly kills me to do the same thing twice. So I've written in a pretty broad variety of genres. So I usually ask people what the last book they really loved was, and then there's probably something near that genre that I wrote. If that doesn't work, I often ask if people like fairy tales. If they say yes, I say, do you prefer it with sex or without? If they say without, I say fairyland. And if they say with, they say deathless. And that's usually the way through. And if it's somebody who doesn't seem like they're into fantasy, I will usually recommend space opera, which is broadly commercial and a comedy. And whether or not you have ever seen Eurovision or know what it is the fun romp kind of book that is easy to recommend.
My problem is that I'm always wrong. I always think I know what this book is about. And no, that's not it. But I only discover halfway through or 3/4 of the way through, damn, I thought I was writing this. I'm actually writing that. Ooh. Well, I know. My watchword is Snoopy. You remember Snoopy? The little dog on the roof? Snoopy writes stories, always. It was a dark and stormy night. Suddenly, a maidservant screamed. A shot rang out. Do 3 to 4 lines like that. And then he turns to the reader and says, in the second half, I pull all this together. Well, that's pretty much the way I write. Always has been. I understand fully. In the second half, I pull all this together. And then it'll look as though I always knew what I was doing. That's mostly what I do to this day. I'm very impressed when I get away with it.
The way I've often thought about that, God, this is going to be the most butch thing I ever say in an interview. The way I've always thought about that is like Babe Ruth calling his shot, like pointing where he's going to hit the ball.
Yes.
And your whole first half of the book is calling your at bat, and then the second half is making it go exactly where you said it was going to go. And then the trick is making people think it was going to go somewhere else when you told them in the beginning where it was going all along.
Right. You remember that Ruth took the first 2 strikes. That's 1. That's 2. Third one he hit out. That's the way it's supposed to be done. And Ruth lived off that story for the rest of his life, as he should, because there were people there who actually saw it. And yeah, I think like that. In the second half, I pull all this together.
I've
I
got
just
a
want everyone
question.
to know that when I look off screen, I am writing down the many brilliant things that Peter said so that I don't forget them.
Yes. And also, I am also taking.
Thank you, love. I'm honored.
Oh yes, no, there's been lots of comments in the chat about how much they're hanging on every word. So I wanted to pick up something from much earlier, which is when you were both talking about the nighttime boogeyman, and Amanda asked, is the fear of not being able to continue to tell stories something that actually helps motivate you to keep telling stories and keep crafting words? Is that continuous fight against the boogeyman actually useful in this business?
Not for me. I find it paralyzing. Like I try not to. That's a 3 a.m. truth o'clock sleep demon.
Oh, I know that. I know 3 a.m.
Yeah,
I know 3 a.m. very well.
But I have learned to trust that it will go away. That is what I've got. That sleep paralysis demon will always come back, but it will go. Like maybe it'll take a day or 2, but someday a day will dawn this week sometime, because I have a deadline and people to yell at me. And I will at least, I will at least believe that I can do it for a minute. This is why I've always written books as quickly as I have, because I can outrace my self-doubt about 2 months, 3 months to get a first draft out. And then it all comes crashing down. So like that is the way I have learned to deal with it. But it's tough. And I've always thought maybe that would go away if like a book or 2 did well. It doesn't. Because then it's just like, well, that one did well. Well, I'll never be able to do that again. Now what?
I'm about a third of the way through a new book. It's a good third. I really do think that's nice. Good for me. Now what? And I literally mean that. I lie in bed, think, okay, at least I got this far. Okay, I got this far into it, and I know the first paragraph of the next chapter. I can do that. Now what? And I will stall. I will push invent things to do that keep me from writing. But in the end, I have to come back and face it. Shit, think then. For goodness sake, you've gone this far. Think. And eventually I will think of something, because that's what I do. But the terror is always back in my head. What if I can't do that? All my life, I've always done this. It's the one thing I could rely on. Didn't have religion, didn't have talent, didn't have anything but this. What if it's gone? It's always that, what if it's gone? Then there's really nothing to do but lie here like a lot of people I know and wait to die. So inevitably I go back to work, because that's what I do.
Keep working. I'm hearing the cries of "don't say that" in the background, but I think that's very poignant, isn't it? That sense that this is the thing that you do, so you should keep doing it. I think you've just had a new book out. You've got a new one out, coming out next year, and I think you said you're partway through the next one. So I feel like we're very blessed, in fact. And
so far, but what next? What the one coming out next year? What about after that? What do I do? I'll think of something. I will think of something, because there's nothing sweeter than falling asleep knowing I know what comes in the next page, or I know the next chapter. I'll write the next chapter. I'll think beyond that. I'll think of something. It comes down to that. I'll think of something. That's all I've got. That's all I've ever had. I'll think of something.
Upstairs in my office.
Just telling stories to my children, making up something as I go along, because they want to know. I'll think of something. Go to bed. I'll think of something tomorrow. Go to bed.
Upstairs in my office, I have a little piece of cardstock that on which I wrote, "All you have to do is think of something wonderful and write it down." Some days that's more convincing than others.
Yeah,
I was going to say, that sounds amazing to me.
But of course, that's it. It's hardly it. I leave notes to myself like that. I know that. But that's what we do.
I think if you're running out of ideas, our chat has some suggestions. Somebody has said, will you ever write a book from the perspective of the times before the last unicorn, about things that happened then? And somebody else has said, will you ever revisit the world of the Innkeeper's Song?
I would love the Innkeeper Song. I have a particular fondness for that one. And yes, I'd like to go back to it, because I remember, I may be making this up, but I remember that book as a joy to write. That was fun. Comes down to that. That was fun. Imagine fun, actual fun. I'd like to go, yeah, I would like to go back to that. I'm glad you mentioned it. Thanks. Whatever you were, thanks very much. That was fun.
The person who mentioned the Innkeeper Song was Debbie Woodhouse. So thank you for that, Debbie. We've also had people mention The Folk in the Air, and whether that book is ever going to come back into print. The Folk of the Air.
The Folk of the Air, I was making that one up as I went along. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was involved with a group of medieval reenactors in Berkeley a long, long time ago. Always wanted to write a book about them, and so I just began writing it. I didn't know what I was doing. it never came out quite right. I wrote that book about 5 times before it was published. And I still think the 6th time would have done it. 6th time around, I should have done that right. But I feel better about it now than I used to. Not as bad as all that. It comes. Sometimes you settle for that. It's not as bad as all that.
Okay, I've got a question for both of you, which is, Tolkien used to share his stories with his friends. Do you have, or have you ever had, any pre-readers of books in progress?
I'm not quite sure. I have to check off camera for a moment what I'm allowed to talk about. Do I need to say something about the new book?
Dragons one?
Yeah.
Yes, you should, about
Okay.
Ursula.
All right. Just checking. Okay, I am allowed to mention, I really do like I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons. That was fun because it combined perfect elements. Perfect elements. On the one hand, yes, I'm making it up as I go along because that's what I do. On the other hand, I know where I'm going. There's an old folk song. I know where I'm going, and I know who's going with me. I know who I love, but God knows who I'll marry. I love that song. It's kind of like that, writing books. I know where I'm going. I know who's going with me.
Mention Ursula.
And that's it. But it's called I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons. And this is scary because I actually like this one. I never like a book when it's coming out. I always know what I've done wrong. Maybe
But you're really
a bad
excited
sign.
about
I
this
actually
one.
like this one. I have a feeling, my Lord, maybe after all this time, it actually came out all right. Maybe. I could be setting myself up for a terrible calamity.
I've been
But
told by
right
a
now,
trustworthy source it's amazing. I'm excited to read it.
Yeah, so the question was whether you use pre-readers as you're developing books. Was there somebody who read the book when you had it in kind of first draft basis and gave you feedback on it?
I'm sorry, tell me again, I'm still missing that.
The question was about whether you have pre-readers, people, beta readers, who read the book while you're working on it and give you feedback.
I have,
Do you have anyone like that?
I have a friend. She's a writer. We've known each other for a very long time. She's a very good writer. I tease her because she just does so many things. I always tell her, you're too busy. She's a musician. She tours. She never has enough time to go over the book one more time because she's doing something else. But when it comes to my work, damn it to hell, she knows what she's doing. She came to the house, one book, this one, as a matter of fact. She came to the house about 5 times, and she lives a long way from my house. She came 5 nights in a row to go over that damn book. She said, the first part is perfect. The 3rd part is perfect. Where were you in the 2nd part? What happened? You take a nap? We yell at each other. A good deal. But she's always right, goddammit. And I go back and do it again until finally she says, yeah, okay, that's all right. It's good to have, some people have 2 people like that. I've really only got 1. But I'm very grateful for her.
I have in the past, but I don't at the moment. So I'm kind of groping in the dark with 2 to 4 hands. But like, yeah, I used to have people that did do a read through, but now it's mostly my editor. I hope that I will have that in the future. But it is hard to find somebody who both understands what you're aiming for and isn't afraid to tell you you'd missed, but also can tell you missed in a way that you can receive well and explain what they mean. Like it's a unique combination of qualities.
It is. And very rare to have someone like that, someone who can both tell you the truth without gutting your insides. and somebody you trust, and somebody you can still talk to the next morning. And she told you exactly what's wrong with the book. Oh Christ, I can never look her in the eye again. But somehow we have always stayed friends. I've come to realize how grateful I am.
I will tell this without any names or names of books. One of my books, when I got my editorial letter and everything, had no real notes, but I knew it needed help. I knew it wasn't where it should be. So I hired a friend of mine who's a freelance editor to give it a pass. And I knew it would be rough because they're a real hard ass. And when we sat down to talk about it, the first thing they said was, okay, if you need to safe word at any point, you let me know. And it was it was very bracing to hear all of it, but they were right. And it made it a fundamentally better book. But it is safe word people trust and upsetting sometimes.
I can remember sending a story to my agent, whom I'd had since I was a teenager. She was John Steinbeck's agent. She had gone into business with one agent, with one client, and that was John Steinbeck. And we became friends when I was a teenager. And she was my agent until she died. But she sent me a letter once that just said, "You have finally done it. You have sent me a story about which I understand not one mumbling word." And she was quite right. And of course, I never published it. I was very young at the time. But I remember that still. You have finally sent me a story of which I understand not one mumbling word. And I took her very seriously and just junked the story. Thank God I don't remember it. But I was very aggrieved at the time. I was still very young. It's very important if somebody doesn't kill you when you're very young, you might actually learn a few things. Just stick around. You will learn. As I say, I had a dear friend I was married to, who was the best writer I ever knew, better than I am. And I'm still grateful that we're married for 11 years, and I still worry about her because she's not well, and she's still the best writer I ever knew.
I've got a question here from Pam Livingston, who's actually the woman who organised all of the Glasgow 2024 presents, so we're very grateful for her. But she says, and again, for both of you, let's start with Peter. Do you ever feel guilty about doing bad things to your characters?
No, not really. They have it coming. In fact, actually, I always find I like my characters. That's the thing. They may be villains, but I like them. King Lear in The Last Unicorn, I have a deep tenderness for because I understand him. And I know how quietly, I know how easily I could have been King Lear. It wouldn't take much. King Lear just had King Lear never had anybody who loved him until he saw unicorns for the first time and fell in love. I was very lucky. I had two parents who finally were the great blessing of my life more than anything else. My father had all the books in the world. Well, my mother did too. And they were in the living room. And I could disappear into the living room. If I didn't understand the book, I took down from the shelf because nothing was forbidden. If I didn't understand the book, I put it back, try something else. And My parents were both teachers, and as far as I know, I am the one man of any promise my father did not encourage to become a teacher, not ever. He actually knew that there was something else I was supposed to do. And I'm very grateful that he lived long enough to see me actually doing it. And my mother lived to be 100, and I was still reading to her because that's the way I grew up. That's how lucky I've been. Everything else from that time has been gravy, really. And I talk to young writers about this kind of thing because it finally dawned on me, not everybody has that. Not everybody gets that kind of encouragement from day one. Oh, I was lucky. It took me a while to realize just how lucky I've been.
I'm sorry, I was listening to Peter so much, I forgot what the question is.
Oh,
The question.
me too, believe it.
Such a long time ago, but the question was, do you feel guilty when you do horrible things to your characters?
Yeah, no, not really. There's a bit in Deathless where there's a pretty significant main character death toll. And I was sad going, I knew that was coming. And I was sad going into it because I loved all those characters, but like that was just what was gonna happen. So there wasn't anything I could do about that. So no, I don't really feel guilty for it. I feel bad for them. But you know, I never do anything bad to somebody where it isn't intended to have a pretty spectacular effect. So I usually get excited about the downstream effects, and I'm fine with that. And I think what Peter was saying about, you know, the characters that we write, even the ones who do the worst things, you know, it's almost always people didn't get enough love. That's pretty much the root of all evil. You know, people who just
it is.
didn't get enough love, didn't get enough trust, didn't get enough of being seen. People will do some of the most awful things in the world just to feel seen. And I think that's the beginning of the kind of empathy it takes to make these characters, to understand that. It doesn't make them less wrong or bad, but it's something that we've all experienced at one point or another, whether it's from parents or peers or partners. I didn't have a lot of encouragement as a young writer. Peter was actually pretty lonely in that until I was in my 20s, because everyone told me that I didn't have it, like to quit, don't even try. And certainly when I was in college and trying to write science fiction and fantasy, no one had any time for it in any creative writing class I ever took. And so my path was more ornery in that every time someone told me that, the level of profanity in my mental response raised, and it was always like, well, I'll write something good enough to make you eat those words. And that was enough to fuel me into like my first steps as a writer, just pure spite at the people who probably should have at least been like, hey, good try, you know, just a little bit of positive reinforcement. But I think that whatever fills you up with enough fire to have fire left over to put on a page is worthwhile, because we all have fire. It's just that life takes a lot of that fire, and it's hard to have enough left at the end of everything in your life that needs your energy to put it on the page. And if there is something, be it love or spite or hope or despair, that gives you enough to overflow, then that's your origin story.
My hero, in a strange personal way, was an English writer named Joyce Carey, C-A-R-Y, and the first name Joyce, man. Joyce Carey became known for, well, he started out as a painter and decided he wasn't good enough. Wasn't good enough, all right. So he wrote a novel and then wrote novels about painters. He wrote novels like nobody else, and he got better and better as he got older. And I think about him a lot because as an old man, he had things wrong with him. He couldn't really get out of bed. Everything faded except this thing of his that made stories. A friend designed a bed for him that made it possible for him to lie there, facing almost no friction, almost nothing. There's nothing to do except what he wanted to do, which is with a pencil. For God's sake, we use computers. I use a typewriter for many years. Carey just had a pad and a pen, and he wrote as long as he could. And I think about Joyce Carey, who was a hell of a writer. I think about him a great deal because every time I'm feeling self-pitying, I remind myself, you have no complaints, shut up. You have nothing to complain about. Don't even talk to me. Because it matters to me. Okay. Joyce Carey could survive and do what he did, go back to work. Like that. Okay. I can do that.
That's extraordinary. So you're saying you take inspiration from people who manage to continue their work and art despite having very considerable disabilities that made it almost impossible.
It just reminds me of how incredibly lucky I've been. There's no way in the world I can complain, no matter how, oh yeah, I'm not sure about this, that paragraph, I'm not sure about this, that woman's never going to like me, I know that. All right, can't help that. But I have absolutely no complaints about any bloody thing. My God, I've been lucky. All I can do is just go on. And I do not want to hear a word from you about complaint. Shut up. Do your work.
On the theory that no one really passes away until people stop saying their name, I don't know how many people watching remember a writer named Jay Lake, but he was a very wonderful man, an incredible writer who died of cancer some years ago. And I was at Worldcon in Melbourne in 2010 with him and said something at the bar about like my goal for this trip is I want to put my feet in the Indian Ocean, not the bay. Like the open ocean. And he knew he had cancer and he knew he wasn't going to make it even then. And he said, okay, let's go. Like, I have a rental car, let's go. And we drove together out down that road and we put our feet in that very cold ocean. And I remember looking down at our toes and knowing that this might, and it did turn out to be the last time I ever saw him. And Jay, if anyone recalls, is incredibly prolific. He wrote so many books and a beautiful essay about people complaining about that too, and why he wrote so many books. And every time I feel like I don't want to write today and this book isn't going well and my deadline's dumb, I think that Jay would give just about anything to be here complaining about a new book. Yeah, shut up, do your work.
Always comes to that. Shut up, do your work. Yeah.
I have a couple of slightly more light-hearted questions. Do you still play the guitar, Peter? And what instruments do you play, Cat? Says Nix.
I still play. I'm out of practice, but I still finger pick. much as I grew up with folk songs of one kind or another, and I fell in love with the styles of. Finally, it comes down to Kentucky fingerpickers, Chet Atkins, Jerry Reed, especially, and I still have a guitar in my room, and it's an excuse. Well, that's fair. I haven't practiced in a couple of days. That's fair. I'll get back to writing in a minute now. Do you still remember that thing? You had it. No, that's not it. Tried it. Well, use the other finger. You pick. I use all my fingers, all the ones I can get. Okay. All right. Okay, that's better. But that's the other thing I was able to do. I'm terrified of losing that. That was the other thing. I can tell stories and I can play the guitar, and that is bloody it. So it's important not to lose anything.
I appreciate the confidence with which you think I play an instrument. I don't, unfortunately. I wish that I did. I play a little bit of a lot of things, and I was taking accordion lessons and getting okay at it. It was what I always wanted to play when I developed very severe carpal tunnel. And it's not the only hobby that I had to give up, but I could no longer take that weight on my forearms. I still have a beautiful bright red accordion named Gretchen. She's a wonderful girl, and she is much neglected. Although now I do the chords and the squeezing, and my son plays the keys, and that I can just about handle. But I sing, and I have, as I said, I live on a small island. We have. It's not a nightclub, but it's like a family-friendly kind of nightclub thing, and I get to host karaoke once a week, so I get my singing practice in, and I love to sing.
That's nice.
Yeah,
that's lovely.
It's a lot of fun.
That matters.
And what I often end up doing, because people get very nervous, I have a very low voice for a girl, and I'll often stand behind them out of reach of the microphone and just sing the song so that they can use it as a rail to remember how the song goes, because people are used to singing with a singer and can often freeze up. So I sing backup quite a bit for people so they can get through the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Someone wants to do it every week. I don't know why.
Splendid song. I know that. That's a long song too.
It's a really long song.
I could sing before I could speak. There were times when I was so much too shy to speak, much too embarrassed. But I could always sing. That was different. That was completely different. And I've been told it is different, that you are using different parts of you, different parts of your head or your throat when you speak is when you sing. And I can believe that. Because
I also said before I spoke.
Singing always came easier.
Do you have folk singers who you particularly admire, or current favorite singers and songwriters? That was from me, by the way.
Richard Thompson jumps to mind. And what's the woman with the super low voice? I'm not gonna be able to come up with it off the top of my head, but there's one with, like, I can hear her voice in my mind right now, and I can't come up with it, but she did a great version.
For me, I always come back to the French singer I heard the first time.
June Tabor. That's it.
What?
I nearly said June Tabor.
Tabor. Okay. And of course, S.J. Tucker. I would be silly not to mention S.J.
For me, it was Georges Brassens. I heard that voice. Who the hell is that? It was low. It was hoarse. It was never going off key. It sounded it was about to go off key, but never did. And he was a singer and songwriter. I learned French to find out what the hell that song was. What's he doing? And I got jobs in France. Well, I didn't. I sang American folk songs in France, but it was a trade because I learned to sing Brassens songs. And then many years later in Santa Cruz, I got a gig singing a couple of nights a week, as I said, singing I sang other things, but there was always Brassens. And to this day, I can't explain it, except that the French think of him as a great poet. He's still remembered as a poet. There are a lot of books out about Brassens' poetry. But he could sing in a way that nobody else could. Even there's nothing fancy about it, but I'd know that voice anywhere, even now, because it mattered so much to me. I'd like to do. I can't do that. And I'm sure I had much more voice than he had, but I can't do what he did.
I'm told we need to be getting on to wrapping up now. So I have a final question, which is from Zay. Question for both wonderful guests. Do you have any plans to attend a UK convention in the near future?
I'd love to. Someone should invite me.
I mean, I think this is your chance to say you'd love to come to Glasgow.
All I know is to say, pay attention to what everybody's tells you. You can learn from everybody. Even when they're wrong, you can learn something. You can learn, well, I don't want to do that, but that's interesting. Or I can't do that. I wish I could, but I can't. But this other thing that I do, I don't think anybody else is doing that. I have to do that. I have to, whatever it is, I believe in it. I don't know what the hell it is, but I believe in it. It comes to that. I don't know what the hell it is, but I believe in it. That's all I've got.
Okay, so I do know, because I think Peter said earlier that he's very much hoping to be at Glasgow next year, and I hope that as many of you in the audience will come to Glasgow as possible. I'd like very much, I need to apologise to anyone whose questions we didn't get to. We did get an enormous number of questions today, but thank you all very much. Thank you so much, Peter and Kat, for being wonderful guests. I need to pop a little link into the chat saying if you'd like to buy a t-shirt like mine. This is the Glasgow merchandise link. We're obviously encouraging people to come to Glasgow. There's going to be a load of announcements from the Glasgow Worldcon over the next couple of days, so do keep an eye out on everything. And I think I just need to say, I think Pam herself's going to pop on and say something at the end as well, as this is the very last Glasgow 2024 presents events. I just like to thank you ever so much for what I think was a fantastic discussion. And if there's anything else you'd like to say in close, first Peter and then Kat, that would be great.
I like remembering a cat that I lived with for 15 years. He was very sophisticated. He was much hipper than I was. He was black and lean, and he went his own way, but he would come and guide me down to the barn where I was supposed to be working for 15 years because I was part of his routine. And when he realized that I was blue, and he always knew, mostly he left me alone. He'd come and go through the window. I had to stay there because I was working. He would come and check on me to make sure I was there. But I remember every now and then, when for one reason or another I was blue, he'd stand in my lap and he'd put his paws around my neck and say very clearly, well, you make a lousy cat, but for a human being you're not bad. Stick with me. We'll be okay. I still think about him at the oddest times. Stick with me. Stay with the cat. You'll be okay. That's all I know.
Kat?
I think this has just been lovely, and if everyone takes nothing else from it, which I can't imagine how you would take nothing else from this. You see how often we've talked about the connections that we just make with people that we never know are going to happen and how much those can matter. The only way you make those connections, and that includes discovering the things that end up becoming books, is by opening yourself to meeting people and being interested in people and in the world. And the world can be a very frightening and dark place, and it has been only more frightening and darker of late. But there are still humans out there that shine, and sometimes they are the humans you least expect to be so full of light. And if you don't allow yourself to see that and allow yourself to be curious and open and loving towards others, then you don't make these connections that last a lifetime and change not the world, but a world, a little world.
As we said in my neighborhood growing up, from your mouth to God's ears.
Okay. Right. Thank you all very much. I think it's David who's going to come on. Thank you so much, David, for doing all the tech for this. And he's just going to come on and say a few words about Glasgow 2024 Presents. This is the very last one.
Yeah, thanks very much, everyone, for doing it. So yeah, this is the last Glasgow 2024 Presents video that we're going to be doing. There'll be something new coming on in the new year, a little bit closer to WorldCon. But this is the last program that we're doing for the last, and we've been doing it for the last couple of years. So thanks, everyone, all the guests that we've had. Thanks to Pam, who has been headlining the team, heading the team. Everyone who's worked out behind the scenes, and everyone who's come to all the sessions. We really, really appreciate it. And I don't think we could have ended with a better night. So thank you, Peter, and thank you, Kat, for coming on, and Alison doing a great job. We all really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, I think that's it. So if you want to close the online stream, David, I think we're done.
Let's go in there now.